Manny was a good friend of mine. We had a lot in common. We both started in Unreal at the same time. We both loved multiplayer shooters. And we both liked to eat baked beans. We shared many long nights together, he and I. And Manny showed me what my game could become. But as time grew on, his joints got weaker. His limbs grew tired. And then one day, he croaked. R.I.P. Manny. Welcome back to Devlog 6 of Astro, a multiplayer first-person shooter in zero gravity. This week, I replaced the default Unreal Engine Mannequin with my new and improved Astro Mannequin, and this was no small process, as we'll see, so let's get into it. If you watched the previous devlog, you know that I made a test character to get familiar with the creation process, and I learned a ton from that. I wanted to make a new character from scratch, however, that would have no details and just be a pure mannequin to cover a skeleton. The reason for this is that, like most games, I want to have a ton of different skins that the player can equip, but I don't want to have to redo the animations for every single skin, because that would just be way too much work. To achieve this effect, you need to share the same skeleton. So the reason for making an unplayable mannequin skin is that this character will allow me to see pure forms and positions much easier. When you work with a complex character, as I found out from last week, there can sometimes be weird quirks with the way that the character is modeled that will affect the pose and the look of the animations. And so then if the same animation was played on another character, it might look a little bit different or just off. So if I have a base mannequin that has perfect form, it'll be much easier to animate the character first and then transfer all its animations to other skins. So I really quickly made a character sculpt, and this only took me a few hours since it pretty much has no details. And then I remeshed it, and remeshing was much easier this time because I basically just shrink wrapped cylinders all over my character. I was super happy with this process. I mean, tell me this isn't the most beautiful topology you've ever seen. Next, I added the skeleton, and I tried to make some informed decisions for my test run to improve the deformations. So originally, I wasn't going to give away my secrets, but what the heck, I'll spoil you guys. So the two major improvements that I discovered were adding this extra shoulder bone and an extra forearm bone. So if you try to move your shoulders, you'll notice that the range of motion is incredible, and this does not translate well to most video game characters. This extra bone that I added just preserves the volume a little bit better by breaking up the rotation into two segments. And you can see that the way that the bone is positioned and the way I rotate it actually sort of gives the illusion of a shoulder that's kind of still there. Obviously it's not, it's just the way that it's weight painted and the way the bone is set up, but I found that this exact orientation kind of gives that effect of a shoulder rotating around like a pivot, around like more of your skeleton, more of your spine. So I thought that was pretty cool. And the process is pretty much the exact same for the forearm. So basically there's a second forearm bone here, and if you notice, like if you grab your wrist and you try to rotate your hand, you actually don't have much rotation at all. It actually all comes from the forearm. So if you grab your elbow and then rotate your hand, you'll notice that it's the twisting of your forearm, and that's because of the way your bones are in the form, which is kind of weird. Obviously I can't bring that into game, but I can just add this extra twist bone that sort of mimics the effect, and it preserves the volume a lot more in rotations. So basically, the long story short is that a lot of times when you're making the skeleton and you're designing the weight painting and the character in general, you want to try to make these crazy poses and these crazy twists, but you want to still preserve the volume of all the joints because otherwise it will just look ridiculous. And so you want to try to get the best of both worlds, and so that's what these were doing. But I tried to keep the bones to a minimum, obviously, because more bones means less performance. So I thought this was a pretty good compromise. And the wrist, of course, and the shoulder are very important because not only are those going to be moving a ton, but you will see the wrist in first person as well. So that's why I spent a little bit of extra time on this process. Next came the weight painting, and this was a pain as usual, but I really wanted to make it perfect because I'm going to be looking at this mannequin for a long time. So this meant just making sure that even the most extreme deformations were possible and realistic, and I just spent a lot of time tweaking every single vertex to get it exactly right. I even also did a little bit of scripting here, so I took from what I learned from when I made the map, and I did a little Python scripting for Blender to just make some nice little convenient tools to mirror vertex groups, stuff like that. So then after this, I textured the model, and I tried several different methods, but I actually I'm not going to use this mannequin in game anyway, so it's just for me to look at, so I didn't spend too much time. I basically just wanted a texture that would allow me to see how the mesh was deforming and give me a little bit of depth perception. So yeah, I figured that this texture looked pretty good. And then after that, I got to work putting everything in the engine, and this is obviously way easier than the last time because I basically just copied the import settings, so I'm so glad I got that over with. And then once in engine, I just created, so first I did the physics asset, and if you remember from last video, that was just how I made the ragdolls, so I had to redo this, but this time I actually tried to go full out, so I just really pinned down every joint and constraint and tried to make it as realistic as possible. And this was a long and tedious process. I mean, it's just so frustrating dealing with bone roll and stuff like that. This took me like a really long time, and I actually had to redo it a couple times, unfortunately, from going back and doing other tweaks, which was such a pain. But in the end, it was definitely worth the effort, and you can see like just the physics ragdolls are just always so cool. So, and I'm going to be showcasing this in my game a lot, since I'm probably just going to use physics ragdolls for the death animation. So yeah, I was really happy with that. And my next and last but not least step was to create the control rig for the character. So I didn't ever end up doing this for the last character, so I was a little nervous because I technically hadn't done this step. So I've done this before, but I hadn't done it with a complete new skeleton, so I was hoping that I had done everything right. And yeah, the control rig is basically just a cool mix of sort of code, tech art type thing, where you make these controls that allow you to easily animate the skeleton. And I spent a lot of time planning and creating my rig, just because I'm gonna have to be using it for every animation in the game, because I'm animating in engine as opposed to like in another 3D software. And I tried to make sure like all the possible use cases for different positions and different types of rotations would be accounted for. And I also had to spend some time making use of those bones I mentioned, those extra bones. I had to incorporate controls that will allow me to rotate them properly to actually get the wrist to twist in a realistic way and stuff like that. So I'm explaining this as if it was just kind of like a sequence of events that I just worked through, but I actually went pretty much all the way back to the base sculpt and iterated from scratch to finish like about 10, maybe even 15 times. Just going either back to the base sculpt or back to like other steps to just fix, tweak results. And you can probably see from the recordings, like some of the poses and some of the forms of the character looks a little wonky, and just I kept changing it a ton of different times, and that's one of the reasons why I had to remake the physics asset like several times. But I mean, every time it got better and better, and I'm really happy with where it landed. So yeah, here's the final result of the fully custom Astro mannequin. So yeah, that's what I've been doing all week, and my plans for next week are basically to start creating the animation system and actually putting all of this work to good use. So this will be way more fun because I'll actually just be getting away from Blender and doing some code, some scripting, and some animating, and yeah, making the idle animations, making the shooting animations, stuff like that. So thanks for making it to the end of the video, and stay tuned for the next devlog. Peace.